Hi, I'm Steve and welcome to another Down Home Clean Carnivore video. One of the questions that people ask me is, how do you know what belongs in the book? The honest answer is that usually I don't. In fact, some of my favorite chapters almost never made it into the manuscript because at first they didn't look like chapters at all. They looked like ordinary days. One afternoon I found myself sitting in our trailer watching the signal bars on my phone. I caught myself quietly saying, "Come on, bars, come on, bars." As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I laughed. Imagine that. After all these years, here I was cheering for one more bar of internet. At first, it seemed funny enough to tell Beth, but hardly worth writing down. Then I realized that those little bars weren't about technology at all. They represented connection. They meant another newsletter could be published. Another video could be uploaded. Another conversation could begin. What looked like a story about internet service became a story about purpose. Another time I stumbled onto a solution after chasing what I thought was a problem. I found a feature hidden one step deeper inside a piece of software, and when I did, everything suddenly worked. The only word that came to my mind was Shazam. I laughed out loud. It would have been easy to leave the moment there, but later I realized that that little discovery reflected something much larger. Again and again, I had been learning that many of life's frustrations aren't disasters waiting to happen. They're simply solutions waiting to be discovered. That little word, Shazam, ended up carrying far more meaning than I ever imagined. Then there was the afternoon that I lost an entire video because the tracking software suddenly woke up in the middle of recording and swung the camera where it didn't belong. I had been talking with energy. The message was flowing, and in an instant, the take was gone. I shut everything down, started over, and recorded it again. Later, as I thought about what had happened, I wrote a sentence that surprised me. The tracker failed, I didn't. I wasn't really writing about a camera anymore. I was writing about resilience. The equipment had stumbled, but the mission hadn't. That one sentence became a chapter. Another story began with fear I carried for months. I thought creating YouTube videos meant disappearing from life. In my mind, I could hear myself saying, "Everybody be quiet. Daddy's filming." Then one day I separated filming from editing, editing from uploading, and uploading from scheduling. Within a couple of hours, I had recorded an entire series of videos. The fear disappeared because the unknown had become the known. And I realized something. I hadn't expected it. The content no longer controlled my life. It fit inside my life. What began as a lesson about workflow became a lesson about freedom. Morning, I posted a photograph of a sunrise that had actually been taken years earlier while I was house sitting for friends. We were no longer living beside the water. Beth and I were in a trailer tucked among the trees with an entirely different view outside the window. Yet, as I drank my coffee, I realized that the feeling was exactly the same. The scenery had changed, but the peace remained. That wasn't a story about a photograph. It was a story about discovering that peace isn't tied to a location. It travels with you because the Lord travels with you. That's what keeps happening as I write this book. The chapter rarely announces itself. It begins disguised as an ordinary moment. It might be a sentence that makes me laugh, or a conversation with a stranger, a technical problem, or a quiet morning with a cup of coffee. Only later, when I look back, do I recognize that the Lord was teaching me something far more important than I understood at the time. The older I get, the more I'm convinced I become the life that is filled with moments like these. We tend to overlook them because they don't seem dramatic enough to matter. We assume the impatient lessons arrive with fanfare and soundtrack, when more often they arrive wrapped inside ordinary Tuesdays. They quietly wait for someone to notice them. That's why I keep writing. Not because every day is extraordinary, but because ordinary days often carry extraordinary truths. In the next episode, I'd like to tell you about why this isn't really a carnivore book at all. Meat may have opened the first door, but what I found on the other side had very little to do with food.